In this video, we are going to be building a select component using React and TypeScript. Let's get started. So the first thing that you're going to do is do npx create react app, and you're going to do template equals TypeScript. So yeah, the first thing you're going to do is create your React app, and we'll be back after this is finished. Alright, so we are done building our React app, and we are going to now type npm start into our terminal, and you will see that our localhost port 3000 loads up, and we have a spinner React with our boilerplate React template code. So the first thing that we will do is just completely remove our header here, and the second thing that we will do is convert our function to a different type of component, and I am using GitHub Copilot to do a little bit of code completion for me here, and export default app. Alright, so we now have our app here, and the next thing that we are going to do is convert our CSS file to a CSS module. And we will do that by changing it from app.css to app.module.css. And now we are going to delete everything inside of this. And we need to import styles from app.module.css. And now we will say div class name is equal to styles, and we are going to use the app class. All right, and so now we've got our app class here. And so we are going to just simply give it a padding of 24 pixels, and we will give this a test inside just to see that it is in fact 24 pixels inside with the padding. And yeah, so that's going to do it for our layout. Now let's get started building out our component now. So we are going to create a components library. And inside of here, we will create a select folder. And inside of here, we are going to create an index.ts file, a select.tsx file, and a select.module.css file as well. So now inside of select.tsx, we are going to say import React from React. Let's see, the next thing we are going to do is say const select. Yep, we can just auto select this here, or auto complete. And we are going to do an export const select here. And so now we have our select component. Inside of our index.ts file, we will say export select from select, and we will say import styles from select.module.css, and we will give this div a class name equal to styles select, and we will wrap this div inside of a React fragment. And so what we're going to do is we are going to have a select, which will be a main element, and then we will have another div, which will be the drop down that will render out all of our items. But we'll get back to this. For now, let's go back to our app.tsx file, and let's render in our select component that we have created. And inside of this, let's just do a test. All right, so you see we are now rendering our select. Perfect. Okay, so what we are going to do now is give some base styling to our select class, and to do that we are going to give it a display of flex. We are going to give it a padding of 24 pixels, and we are going to give it a border of 1 pixel solid at 000. And so you will see that it is expanding to the full width of this block. So let's give it a width of fit content. And yes, so you see now we have our select rendering here. And we are also going to give it a cursor, which is equal to pointer, so that when you hover over it, it has a pointer. And yeah, so I mean, for a very basic select, this is looking, all right. Let's give it a little bit less padding here. I'll do 8 pixels, 24, do 816. And now let's give this inside text. Let's give it a span. So we'll wrap it around a span, and we will target that span now and give it a font size of 14 pixels. Just make it a little bit smaller. And perfect. So what we're going to do now is, instead of rendering just a basic string here, we are going to start defining our select properties, and we will do that by creating a select props interface, and we will be using that interface for our TypeScript definitions. And the first thing that we want to use for our select props will be a placeholder, and we will make that optional with the question mark notation, and we will render our placeholder here. And so you can see we have an empty select, and if we go back to our app.tsx file now and give it a placeholder, we can say select a car. And so yeah, you can see that we are now rendering our select placeholder through this placeholder property that we are passing to our select component. So this is working pretty nicely. So now when you think about a select, you got to realize and you got to think about everything else that you're going to need. So you're going to need a value, right? A selected value. And we are also going to need some options. Now, let's get started building out our options. And for options, so we are going to create an array, but instead of a string array, we are going to create a type. And I'll create a type option, set it equal to this here. And we are going to have a label, which will be a string, and a value, which will be a string or a number. And now for our options, we are going to use an options list that we defined above, just like so. And so as you can see, we are missing this property now inside of our select element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that option type, and I'm going to remove it from this file, and inside of our source folder, I am going to create an interfaces.ts file. And now I'm going to export this type from that interfaces.ts file. And now I am going to import, we are going to import option from, and we will import it from our interfaces file, just like so. And so now we are still missing the options property. Now the reason that I moved this into a shared interfaces file, like so, is that I can now just import option from interfaces, and we can import the same type in multiple places. Now the reason we want to do that is so that we can, for example, as you can see here, we can create an options array, and we can set the type for the data inside of this array set to the option that we had created inside of our interfaces. So that's why we want to separate it out here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in that options property now, and we are going to pass the options array that we created here, and I'm going to pass it with a few different labels and value pairs. So for the first one, I will do an Audi, and for value I will do Audi. And let's see, so for second one I will do Ferrari. value will be Ferrari. And the third one, I will do Mercedes-Benz, Mercedes. And the fourth one, we will do a BMW, BMW. And for the last one, I will do Tesla with a value of Tesla. And perfect, so we have our options. We are passing the options into our select component now. But as you can see, we're not currently displaying these options. So what we're going to want to do now is we are going to want to actually start rendering these options. And the way that we are going to do that is by giving another div inside of this React fragment, and we are going to give it a class name equal to styles, and we are going to do options now. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we are going to accept options as another parameter here for this component. And so we are also going to want to make sure that we only display our options when this is active, right? You don't want to just display all of your options unless somebody actually clicks on the dropdown. So the way that we are going to control that is by using a use state hook. And so we are going to create a show options, set show options, and we are going to autocomplete this. And so we are going to import use state from React. And so we have show options. Now what we are going to do is we are going to say we want to render this div if show options is true, and the way that we do that is just like what you see here. Now what we're going to do here is we are going to iterate through each option, and the way that we do that is just like what you see. So we are going to say options.map, and we are going to render a div, and you can really just fill this out here. And yeah, so this is looking about right. And so now what we want to do is we want to add an onClick handler to this select here now. And we want to say onClick set show options to the opposite of show options. So now if we click select a car, you will see that we don't actually show anything. And the reason that we are not showing anything, let's see. So I'm going to inspect this box, and it's because we don't actually render out anything inside of these options. So we're going to let this autocomplete and close it out. So you can see we've created a span element here, and we are going to render out the option label. And so perfect. So as you can see, we have a list of all of our options, and so we are kind of missing a few things here, right? So first and foremost, we want to have some sort of a border or box around each of these options, right? So that's number one. Number two, we want to have some sort of like a cursor pointer whenever we have each of these as well, so that you know that these are selectable. So let's go ahead and do that now. So inside of our options class, we are going to give it a width of fit content for now. We are going to come back and change this up in a little bit, but for now we will just do that. And so now we are going to target our options class, and inside of that we will target an option class just like this. And so we are going to apply some styling now. So padding, we will do a 8px 16px padding, and border we will do 1px solid 000. And yeah, so this is looking, somewhat decent. Now you can see as we click on our main select, it expands and retracts this list of drop-down items. So one thing I will do now is set a width to 300 pixels for both of these two. And let's see, so that's a little bit off. So I will do 280, 280. All right, so, and now let's remove this padding for now. All right, so what's going on here? So why do we have this at different widths? Let's see. So this one is 280. This one is 280. And let's give this a width of 100%. Perfect, okay. So let's apply this width of 100% to these options. And let's give it a border bottom of none because we do have some double borders going on here. And so now what we want to do in order to apply a border just to this bottom element is we want to target option, and we will do last child border bottom 1px solid 000. And we also still have a double border going on here above the first item. So we are going to do the same targeting with the only difference being that we will target the first child, and we are going to apply this style to the border top, and we are going to set that to none. And so yeah, this is looking pretty good as of right now. And so inside of this, we also will apply a font size of 14 pixels so that we have a consistent font size, and we will give it a cursor equal to pointer as well, just to signify that we in fact can click on these items. So what do we have here? We have a base drop down that you can select here. You can click on and off in order to hide it and show it, as you can see. And we have a list of options here that we can use as well for selecting a value. Now, what we need to do is we need to actually make something happen when one of these items are selected. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a new prop here called onChange. And so instead of a string for the value, we are going to do a selection, and it will be an option. And we will return a void for this. And we are going to now pass this onChange handler into our select component here. And when one of these elements are clicked on, so when somebody clicks on one of these options, we are going to handle our onChange, and we are going to pass in this option. And so we see that we have an error here, and the reason for that is because we have defined our onChange to be optional, and we don't want this to be optional. So we are going to remove that question mark here, and we can now go into our app.tsx file, and we can now pass in our onChange handler. And so now let's just do a console.log, and let's open up our terminal here, and let's see what happens when we click on one of these options. So you can see that we do print out our selected option here, and we print out a label and a value. So now what we will do is we will create a const selection. selected item, set selected item equals to use state, and we are going to, yes, just as so. So we are going to set it to either be an option, or I will actually do null as opposed to undefined. And so now we want to, instead of just console.logging that selection, we can set selected item, and we can set it to be that selection. And so now if we do a console.log selected item, you can see it starts out as null, and as we select a item from our select here, you can see it updates that selected item, and that's exactly what we want. And so now what we need to do is we need to accept a selected value, and yes, so we can make it either option or null, and we want to accept that now within the properties of our component. And so what we are going to do is we are going to pass in that selected value equal to selected item. And so now when we select one of these elements, we are in fact changing the selected item, and we need to render the newly selected item within this current selects placeholder position. So the way that we would do that is by checking if selected, then we want to render selected.label, else we want to render our placeholder. And so yeah, you can see that we can now select a different element here, and as we do that, our drop down selected element changes. And so another thing we will want to do is we will want to hide our show options. So we will no longer want to render our options once an item is selected. So to do that, we can just say set show options to false. And you can see once we make a selection, our items or our options hide and our selected option gets updated. And so another thing that we might want to do here is on the right hand side of our drop down here of our select, we might want to have some sort of a like downward arrow just to indicate visually that this is in fact a select. And so what we can do is give this a justify content of space between, and we will give it first a span for the label, and then secondly I'll just do a simple V, so you can tell that this is some sort of a drop down. Now in a production environment, you probably wouldn't just use a letter V here. There's some character codes that we can use for a downward caret, but this is what we're using for now. That said, we are pretty much complete here. There is one more thing that we might want to look at, but before we get to that, I just want to demonstrate. So if we add a paragraph here and say, hello, my selection is, so we might want to display what our selection is here, right? And so the way we would do that is just by adding in some brackets and rendering selected item dot label, and you can see our selection is rendered here. But there is one particular behavior that you might not want to see if you have a select, and that is that we are currently pushing this paragraph downward. And there's one simple thing that we can do to fix that. And so that would be to, first of all, we want to give a actual div now inside of our select component. And so we are going to give it a class name equal to styles, and we can do select component, and we can give our select component a position of relative, and we can give now our options a position of absolute. And so as you can see, that allows us to not have that drop down push the paragraph down, although it is rendering through it. And the reason for that is because we need to specify a background color, which we will do an FFF. And so yeah, so this is pretty much what you would want to do when it comes to a select component with React and TypeScript. And thank you for watching, and leave a comment letting me know what you thought.